Cut Bank, Montana to New Greenwich,
No,
to Greenwich
first
Village?
first we moved into Westchester, Hartsdale.
Did you?
That's where we rented first.
Mhm.
And then realized how dumb we were. We rented a house there, and you know, here we were with no kids, no reason in the world not to live in the city. So we moved into Greenwich Village.
Mhm. Both you and Scott felt an affinity for the kind of bohemian style of life that at least
The village?
the village is
No.
reputed to have.
Well, but see, what the village really, I mean, it may have been bohemian in comparison to whatever else was in New York at the time. But what the village offered was a neighborhood.
Mhm.
It was really a small town neighborhood then. And we really loved it. It was wonderful. We had nice neighbors, and we again in New York, I really regret all the opportunities that we did not take, because we I suppose we felt like everything would cost us $1 million, and
Besides what you don't do today, you can, there's always
yeah,
tomorrow.
we always do tomorrow.
Mhm.
Yeah. Besides which, what if somebody would know what small town people we were? You know?
Mhm.
What if we'd be embarrassed?
I remember having visited you there,
Mhm.
and I remember that Scott had to crawl out the window to, believe it was to crawl out the window to set up his
set up the
brazier
Mhm.
with his charcoal.
You had to climb up on the radiator and then over the windowsill and onto the fire escape. First time we ever used that charcoal boiler, we visited Harriet and Joe in Dayton when we came through and learned about charcoal, and bought the broiler, and the first time we ever used it, we cooked a duck. Never had cooked a duck, never
Mhm.
didn't know anything at all about it, and you can, our neighbors were glad to see us, because of course that oily smoke just rolling all, and there was not a thing we could do. I mean, we couldn't take it inside.
Mhm.
Oh, it was awful.
Mhm. How long did you live in the village?
2 years.
2 years.
Mm-hmm. Until Morgan came.
And then you went up to Old Greenwich?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Buxtons, John and Eleanor Buxton were good friends of Scott's in high school and all through
From
college.
Kansas?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And they were there when we first, John was working for Stanford of Illinois, and they were living temporarily in White Plains when we first moved out there. And we stayed with them for a while we found someplace to live. And one of those most unusual circumstances where the four people end up, all four, very, very good friends.
Mhm.
And they eventually left Standard, and John went to work with Scott. And Eleanor and I had spent a lot of time one summer driving everywhere around New York, deciding on where we wanted to live. And we had chosen Old Greenwich or Riverside because, again, they had the small town
Mhm.
of atmosphere and feeling. A lot of variety and incomes and lifestyles and ages and such,
Mhm.
which we thought was important. So they had, I think, they had bought a house there before we moved out of the city.
Sure. Talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about how you came to know that you wouldn't be able to bear children, and the process of deciding to adopt and so on.
Well, of course, because, I always assumed that well, of course, you assume you're going to have a lot of kids. But when I wasn't pregnant the first month, I assumed that I probably had, if you'd recall, Harriet and Ruth both had endometriosis. And I figured that was, and I assumed, because Ruth and I are built so much alike, that probably I was gonna have the same problems that she always did. And so, it wasn't, we'd only been married a year, I think, when I suggested that we check into adoption. And of course, the adoption agency thought we were pretty strange, because, I mean, we hadn't even been married that long, and we hadn't even checked to see if there's any reason that we couldn't have them or anything. But when we checked, it was soon apparent that I could have had children easily. Scott's sperm count was such that it was really very unlikely. So we had checked with Spence Chapin, which turned out to be the best agency in New York, and they had told us that it would be several years, as it was normally then, and it was only about 6 months when they called us. And I was in Washington, as a matter of fact, helping Harriet, because she was having some troubles. She was carrying on at the time and having to stay in bed. And I was down there helping her, and Scott called to say that they had called and told us that we had a little girl. Pretty exciting. And then when Bruce came, I was in Cody, and I was out at Ruth's, and he called to say we had a little boy. And again, with Bruce, when we applied, we thought it would be a much longer time than it was. Very nice.
They've been a wonderful part of your life.
I'll say. What I'll say. There were a few years that were pretty difficult, but there are for everybody. It was pretty difficult when we first moved to Salt Lake. But I tell you, now I think if you can have 100% of your kids' spouses be really, really wonderfully top flight, what more can you ask?
Right. That in turn says a great deal for your child himself or herself.
Yeah.
And what they have gained from you and from their experience in life about it helps them to judge their mate. Their taste, speak of it however you like.
That's interesting. That's an interesting way to put it. Of course, we all hope that what we have done, I was thinking that when you were talking about Elise this morning, and the fact that you felt so good about the probability that she is going to be a very fine missionary. And I was thinking, yes, and that also says something kind of wonderful about what you have done as parents. No?
Yeah. It's hard to think of those things, though, because naturally a person tends to see what you perceive to be evidences of less than the best.
Absolutely. Oh boy, I'll say. And want to start over so bad. Oh, no way. No way.
I don't know whether it's something that you care about having on this kind of a tape or not, but it probably is not complete if you don't talk about how you came to go separate ways, you and Scott.
Well, of course, that is hard. It's hard to know, what happened at this point, because we have, through the years, it took a while, and it took a lot of hard work, but we have become very good friends now, and it's kind of hard to remember clearly and specifically what happened. I think that if we had lived someplace different, if it had been another time element. If the world at that point, we were in a society where this was in the I suppose in the 60s, in that really turbulent time when all of the values and mores of our whole society were under question, and marriages were really in trouble everywhere, and we happen to live in a part of the world, in that New York suburb kind of world, where that was very prevalent, and I think that probably we wouldn't have ever even considered it if we had been living in Cutbank.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't even have occurred.
Mm-hmm.
But Scott didn't ever really and truly like being married. I mean, that's sounds cruel and such, but he has said it so many times, and that's what he has told the kids many times. I loved you and I loved your mother and all, but I just didn't like being married, and that makes it sound as if it was his idea and his fault totally, and that's not true, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of problems with well, we're just not getting along. We didn't see things eye to eye.
Just kind of incompatibility.
Yeah, and I was seeing a you know, I suppose it's me in a way, and I think it's part of the times too. If there's a problem, I want to go see somebody to tell me how to solve the problem, please. You know, it's not a matter of learning to live with the problem. You find a way to take care of it.